Welcome to the Ego versus EQ and You podcast, where we discuss the key aspects of emotional intelligence and ways to apply it in everyday living. Now let's work together to make common sense more common. Welcome back to the Ego versus EQ and You podcast. Today we are going to talk about EQ and the human dimensions. So I have asked my co-host, Steve Friedlein, to join me to discuss this, something he knows a lot about. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Jen.
So I thought today we could talk a little bit about personality and maybe change style, communication style, EQ, how it all fits together, because I think people get mixed up sometimes about which is which and what is different or the same about all of these.
Well, there's a lot of connectivity, but it's also pretty complex, even though on the surface it sounds fairly straightforward. A lot of interesting intermingling of those ideas.
Yeah, I think if we look at ourselves, the visual I like to use is almost an upside down pyramid. And at the core of all of us is our character, our morals, our values, things that are generally pretty deeply rooted, may not change over our lifetime, might change, but for a lot of people they don't. And they might also be pretty hidden, like we might not share a lot about our core values or our moral beliefs or things like that.
Yeah. And we get into personality, right?
Yeah, so if you go up a layer.
Yeah, so our temperament, our tendencies, some of the things that we've experienced along the way that create the means by which we continue to connect.
Yeah, so if anyone has taken a personality assessment, probably the most popular one or most commonly taken one is called the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. There's some controversy around it, but in the end, it's a very helpful tool. There's free versions of it online. If you haven't taken one, I would recommend it. But it's really helpful because it helps us assess our introversion versus extroversion, our thinking versus judging, and feeling versus perceiving. So there's 16 categories that make up personality in the Myers-Briggs. There's also a popular one called the Enneagram, if anyone has taken that. That's a personality assessment. And then there's also one called the Big Five.
Right. The introversion versus extroversion is something that we tend to talk about pretty regularly because it impacts so much of what's a good time to be communicating with someone based upon where their energy level is. So I think we can take any aspect of that assessment and create a means by which to connect more effectively with others.
Yeah, it is helpful to know. And introversion, extroversion, I think gets talked about a lot because it is a pretty dominant feature of personality, probably the most dominant, and visible. I can tell if someone is an introvert or an extrovert by watching them. And I know you're giggling because we are opposites, you and I.
Completely.
and it is a scale. So there's like one end is, extreme introversion. The other end is extreme extroversion. And then you can be somewhere on that scale. And there's actually a newer term that's circulating around called ambivert, which would be somebody more just like smack in the middle there. And so they might occasionally dip over to one side or the other, but tend to be pretty neutral. I'm not sure exactly.
Exactly. Well, I think where we're concerned and our opposites, it's really mostly about where does our energy come from, right? And we tend to generate energy in very different ways, let's just say.
We do. So Steve is the morning energy guy. He comes ready to go. We are traveling. We're out on the road. We're getting up early to get over to our site. We're setting up our meeting room or our training room. He is the ever-ready bunny, and he's chatting, talking, chatting. And I'm a little bit more like, okay, I need about an hour here to just get my wheels turning and get going. And as the day goes on, though, I pick up my energy level, and by the afternoon, I'm like, okay, what are we going to do after the session? Let's go out to dinner. Let's go out and do something. And Steve's probably like, just let me go back to the hotel.
Yes. I think what's interesting about this, though, is how do I prolong that energy beyond what's most comfortable for me? You talked about doing a training session, and I tend to wane as the day progresses. It just means that I have to work a little harder to keep that energy flowing. We have the capacity to do that, but it takes a mindset to continue moving in a direction that's inconsistent with what we feel.
Yeah, exactly. Certainly, I do a lot in the morning. It's just not as comfortable for me, or as natural, maybe. And personality is interesting because it is a pretty stable dimension of us, where longitudinal studies have shown as people age, if they retest on a personality assessment, it doesn't change a whole lot. Now, I don't know, Steve, I've heard so many people say to me, well, at home, I'm very different than I am at work. And I always want to say, that's a personality disorder, right? We are not supposed to be extremely different from environment to environment.
Well, and I think, as we transition into style here, because people will also say that their style is different at home than it is at work. And I consistently believe, both for myself and the people around me, I simply use my style in a different way. I don't become a different person. I simply adapt to the people around me from a work scenario to a home scenario.
Yeah, I think that is what changes. So they feel like they're exhibiting a different personality or communication style, but really it's just effort that's changed, or maybe self-awareness that's changed.
Yes.
So personality is pretty deeply rooted. It's formed pretty young in life. It is pretty stable. Up a layer from that, as Steve just mentioned, is communication style or social style. And that is more not why we do what we do, but what we say and what we do. It is 100% behavioral. This is even more visible to me than someone's personality. And we have some people that tend to be a little bit more reserved. Their facial expressions are more controlled. They're harder to read. We have some people that are very animated, and you can tell what they're thinking by the look on their face. Exactly. We have some people that are more indirect and some people that are more direct. So depending on where people fall on those scales, that will determine communication style.
Right. So we talked a little bit about the fact that our style doesn't really change. We use it differently around different people. The interesting thing about style as well, Jen, is the fact that research tells us that we develop those communication styles by the time we're like 5 or 6 years old. And a lot of people will talk about, well, I've changed. I've gone through this different processes. I have different people around me. And I have 2 sons that have very different styles. But I will tell you, visions of who they were started appearing when they were about 5 and 6 years old. And those same tendencies are alive and well in their adult behaviors.
Interesting. So for those of you that have children at home, you can start to identify direct versus indirect, animated versus reserved, and it might hold true, because I had the same experience with my children too, Steve.
Yeah. And again, I think what's important about this is it's what people actually say and do. In the previous podcast, you talked about assumptions, and I think we need to put aside those assumptions when we observe style in other people. It's like, what are they actually saying? What are they actually doing? Putting myself out of the picture and the judgments and assumptions I'm making when I make those observations really helps us determine someone's style more effectively.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it's tempting also to want to be a certain style or think a certain style is best.
Right.
When we go back to personality, if anyone's interested, there is a great book on introversion called Quiet by Susan Cain. And the subtext is the power of introverts in a world that can't stop talking. And I loved that book. I'm an extrovert, and it was so helpful for me to understand the introvert experience and the value of the introverts, especially in leadership.
Well, let's just say I've read that book cover to cover, and I got a lot of dog ears on that book.
I bet, me
So,
too. A lot of
yes,
highlighted pages.
it's very, very helpful.
Hmm.
And I think as we transition now from communication style to the emotional intelligence piece, um, our awareness and our skills. Again, it's just interesting how these all tie together, but they're all very distinctively unique in terms of what they bring to the picture, in terms of how we recognize ourselves and read others.
Yeah, if you look at we stick with our upside down pyramid, the EQ to me is like the top layer. We also have a change style in there that would be more on the level with communication style, and
Right.
that is just our comfort zone around the way we approach change.
Yes.
And you can take an assessment and find out what yours is, but it's stable, like personality and communication style. It tends to not change over time. But EQ is so changeable. That is the best news about it. It helps you use that recognizing part, self-awareness, helps you understand what is your character, what is your personality type, what is your communication and change style, and then how do I read my environment and respond appropriately regardless of if I'm an introvert. I might right now need to be extroverted. If I'm analytical, I might need to be more expressive right now. So it's being able to flex out of those comfort zones of those
Yes.
characteristics and meet the needs of the situation in front of you.
Right. And again, social style is pretty much in place, but the fact that the EQ assessment is basically a snapshot in time as things change around us and we develop skills and raise our self-awareness and deal with stress more effectively, solve problems with other people more effectively. We can increase our ability to gain additional emotional intelligence.
I would agree. And I think, we've worked with a lot of teams and done a lot of assessments, and I've profiled teams that all have the same communication style,
Yes.
but they're very different people, of course. And it's because of those other factors that an introverted style might look different than an extrovert of the same
Yes.
style. So it doesn't mean we're boxing people into these neat little categories. And if this is your change style or this is your social style, that means you're like this all the time. But it does help give ourselves some insight into the way we prefer to work,
Right.
and maybe the way others prefer to work.
Exactly. Well, just last week we were working with a group of people and had them in social style groups. And what we learned is, without any doubt, you may have 6 driving style individuals in the room, but they may go about coming up with results and taking action in very different ways. So there's a commonality within that style, but you add in personality, you add in EQ, you add in core values, and we all have a unique way of using our style, which makes us who we are and makes us individuals.
So one thing I do recognize that partly why I think EQ is so valuable layered on top of all this is because I've met people, and I'm sure you have too, Steve, where once they go through a style training and they know something about their style, they then turn around and use it as an excuse.
Yes.
And, for one example is a driving style, very direct type of person. And I've asked somebody, how do other people describe your leadership style? And they'll say, oh, I'm very direct. I'm a high D on a disc, if anyone's taken a disc, or a driving style on a social style report. That's me. I'm just that way. And so I warn people, hey, I'm super direct. I call it like I see it. And if I ever say something that upsets you, never take it personally, because it's just me being me. And there's some danger in using just the recognizing part, self-awareness, and using that as an excuse to pretty much tell everybody around you, this is me, this is how I'm comfortable. You people adjust.
Right. And I think sometimes too we make the assumption that certain styles are better than others, that someone might assume, for example, that the driving style is the person that gets results, and that's what other people should aspire to, when in fact regardless of your style, you're results oriented. If someone is amiable, they work relationships to come up with the results that they need. If your style is analytical, you work through data and information to make sure that the results are accurate. And as an expressive, someone bringing in new and creative ideas to make sure that we look at all the possibilities before we come to a conclusion. So we all have the capacity to be results oriented. We go about gaining those results in different ways.
Yeah, I know you've had the same experience I have, because there's strengths and weaknesses with all the styles. And I have retested my style multiple times thinking, this time I'm going to be different. This time I'm not going to have all these bad traits of this one style. And every time my report comes back with me in the exact same spot. So
Likewise. Well, the other thing I tell people is, even if you had the capacity to change your style, which we don't,
I know,
you would simply be exchanging one set of strengths and weaknesses for another set of strengths and weaknesses.
That's right.
So there's no perfect place to be in that scenario. But I think we all look for an out in terms of who we'd like to be versus who we are in certain situations.
Okay, well, naturally, this is a huge topic. And for anyone who's interested in learning more about these assessments we're talking about, we have several free sample reports on our website, penumbra.com, if you want to check those out. There's also, like I said, some free versions of various assessments available online. It is helpful. I think it is helpful to know, if we wrap this up in a nutshell here, that if you haven't taken any of these assessments, I do recommend it. I think it's enlightening to know what your comfort zone is. And of course, self-awareness alone is not enough. We still have to use that emotional intelligence to adjust. And, how we can better use this knowledge about ourselves allows you to put yourself in situations that bring out the best in you and minimize the worst of you. So it's really helpful insight.
Absolutely agree.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in today. If you need a topic, if there's a topic you're interested in hearing more about, or you have a challenging situation that you would like some input on, you can email me at podcasts@jenshirkani.com. I'll have the email in the show notes, and we'd be happy to give you some suggestions for next time. We'll keep you anonymous. Don't worry. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for joining us today on the Ego versus EQ and You podcast. If you liked this episode, be sure to follow us or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please share our show with others. For questions or future topic suggestions, please email us at podcast@jenshirkani.com. Until next time, keep using your EQ and show ego who's boss.